Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're plunging headfirst into a book that, let's be honest, grabbed a lot of attention with its title alone,
Oh, for sure.
and then actually delivered something genuinely thought-provoking. We're diving into Mark Manson's The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Feck, a counterintuitive approach to living a good life.
Yeah, it's definitely not your typical, feel-good self-help book, is it?
Hmm.
Manson pulls no punches. He takes a really raw, honest look at what most of us think will make us happy versus what actually seems to lead to a more, well, meaningful and resilient life.
Absolutely. And our mission for this deep dive is to cut through the noise, just like the book tries to do. We want to unpack this blunt, surprisingly insightful work, extracting its core ideas, peeling back the layers of its counterintuitive truths, and kind of bringing to life the powerful stories and examples Manson uses. The goal is really to give you a shortcut to being well-informed about its wisdom, or maybe its anti-wisdom, so you can grapple with these ideas yourself.
And right from the start, Manson needs to clarify what he doesn't mean by not giving a feck. It's not about being indifferent.
Right.
It's not about being apathetic or emotionless, like some kind of vacant-eyed zombie or, as he puts it, a psychopath. That's the furthest thing from his point.
Right, because when you first hear the title, you might picture someone, serenely detached, completely unshakable, nothing bothers them. This calm, cool, unaffected state.
And Manson argues that people who project that kind of indifference are often actually giving too many flaks, just about the wrong things.
Hmm.
They might be lame, scared, hiding away, or like those anonymous internet trolls who are supposedly detached but are actually like furious about everything.
Yeah.
They feign indifference because they care too much about what others think, or they feel uniquely broken with problems no one could possibly understand.
So they use sarcasm or cynicism or this belief in their own specialness to sort of avoid making real choices that might involve vulnerability or discomfort. They're stuck.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the sneaky truth he reveals is that there's no biological state of not giving a feck about anything.
Mm.
It's impossible. We are wired to care.
Okay.
The power isn't in stopping caring, but in choosing what you care about.
And that choice needs to be based on something solid, doesn't it? On, like, personal values you've actually taken the time to define and refine, not just reacting to whatever screams loudest for your attention.
Exactly. It's about consciously deciding what is truly worth your limited energy and emotional investment, and then developing the discipline, the skill, to not give a feck about everything else that doesn't align with those core values. And that, he admits, is the difficult part. It's a lifelong struggle.
A worthy struggle, though, maybe the most worthy one, because without that conscious filtering, you end up giving your finite facts to, well, everything.
Right.
Which brings us directly to the problem he identifies, giving too many facts.
Right, and he opens this idea with a stark, undeniable truth. You're going to die.
Okay, blunt. Definitely sets a tone.
It's effective, though, isn't it? Because between now and then, you have a limited, finite amount of time and emotional energy, a limited number of flux to give. Very few, actually. And if you're just scattergunning those precious few flux everywhere, caring about every little thing that crosses your path without thought,
Then, as he puts it, you're going to be flocked.
you are, because you'll constantly feel like you're entitled to be comfortable, happy, and that everything should conform to your desires. You'll feel like a victim whenever something doesn't go your way.
He calls this feeling of entitlement a sickness that will eat you alive.
It really does. It makes you see every single piece of adversity, no matter how small, as a personal injustice. Every challenge feels like a sign of your inadequacy or failure.
Mm.
Every inconvenience is a personal slight. A simple disagreement with someone feels like this deep existential betrayal.
And we see this play out in those really relatable, almost embarrassing examples he gives, don't we? Like getting furious about a rude gas station attendant.
Oh, yeah.
Or genuinely upset that a TV show you liked was canceled. Or feeling hurt because your coworkers didn't ask about your weekend.
Meanwhile, you're completely ignoring the truly serious problems in your life, right?
Yeah.
Like your maxed out credit cards or genuinely troubled family relationships or a job you hate that's draining your soul. You're wasting your limited flux on trivialities because they feel easier to react to than the big scary stuff.
And he says this leads to what he calls the feedback loop from hell. It is the cycle where you feel bad about feeling bad, which makes you feel worse, and so on.
Exactly. You're trapped in this petty, self-absorbed hell, burning with entitlement and bluster. You're in constant emotional, most angry here, upset there, offended over this, but none of it is actually productive. You're arriving nowhere.
Right.
It happens because you internalize this belief that it's not okay for things to just suck sometimes. So when they inevitably do suck, you immediately blame yourself, feel like something is inherently wrong with you, and that just locks you into the loop tighter.
That really resonates, that feeling of why is this happening to me, when the reality is, well, sometimes things just suck. Which brings us to another uncomfortable truth the book leans into, the necessity of suffering.
Yeah, this is where he directly challenges a lot of the messaging we get today, particularly in Western culture, which seems obsessed with promoting constant happiness and positivity. He argues we're in the midst of a psychological epidemic because people simply haven't internalized that it is absolutely fundamentally okay for things to suck sometimes.
And if you can accept that things suck sometimes, what happens then?
That's when the problems start. That's when the self-blame kicks in, the feeling of inadequacy, the constant seeking of external validation or comfort through overcompensation like, excessive shopping or getting addicted to substances or even resorting to violence. You're running from an inevitable part of life.
So instead of seeking some kind of perpetual bliss, he talks about practical enlightenment.
Yes, exactly. It's not about levitating or reaching a state of serene detachment from all pain. It's about becoming genuinely comfortable with the idea that suffering is always going to be a part of life.
Always.
Failures, loss, regrets, and yes, death itself. These aren't bugs in the system, they are the system.
And the key to handling that inevitable pain isn't eliminating it, but learning how to bear it. The book isn't a guide to making your problems disappear. It's a guide to being brutally honest about the problems you have.
And he points out that psychological pain isn't some, abstract concept. Our brains register it in incredibly similar ways to physical pain. He uses his own experience with a breakup feeling like an ice pick to the gut.
Wow.
Like physical pain from stubbing your toe, emotional pain is a signal. It tells you something is out of equilibrium, you've hit a limit, something is wrong.
And just as stubbing your toe teaches you a quick lesson about paying attention to furniture placement, emotional pain, rejection, failure, loss teaches us valuable lessons about avoiding those same mistakes or situations in the future. It's a feedback mechanism.
This is why he's critical of societal trends that try to shield people from any discomfort or pain. A society that protects itself from the inevitable bumps and bruises of life loses the benefits of those healthy doses of pain. It disconnects us from reality and from learning crucial coping mechanisms.
He uses the memorable image of the disappointment panda, doesn't he?
Oh, yeah.
This idea that no matter what great stride you make or problem you solve, the panda is there to remind you that problems don't end. They just improve. You just trade one set of problems for a slightly better set.
Which is a profound truth, and one that directly challenges the next major trap he identifies, the relentless chasing of happiness.
That's not the point. Isn't happiness the ultimate goal everyone strives for?
It was what we're told, right? And it feels intuitive to make decisions based on what makes us feel good emotionally right now. But Manson argues this is fundamentally flawed because emotions are incredibly volatile and temporary.
Fleeting.
What brings you a fleeting hit of happiness today won't necessarily tomorrow because our biology is constantly seeking novelty, constantly needing more.
The classic hedonic treadmill.
Exactly. You work incredibly hard, achieve something significant, a promotion, a new relationship, a dream house, you get that temporary burst of happiness, and then you return to your baseline.
Yep.
You often end up feeling eerily similar to where you started, still with a sense of inadequacy, still wanting the next thing.
And he points out something really uncomfortable about problems. They're recursive. They don't just disappear when you achieve something, they come with what you achieve.
That's a tough pill to swallow, isn't it? The person you desperately want to marry. That's the person you're also going to fight with. The dream house you buy. That's the house that's going to need expensive repairs.
Oh, yeah.
The exciting new job with more responsibility. That's the job that's going to cause you immense stress and sleepless nights.
Everything you gain comes with its own set of inherent problems and sacrifices. The very things that create your positive experiences are intrinsically linked to what will define your negative ones.
It's the yin and yang of life. And trying to achieve the yin, the positive, while avoiding the yang, the negative, is just, it's a doomed strategy.
So, if chasing happiness and avoiding pain are dead ends, if problems are inevitable and even necessary, what's the alternative? The book suggests asking a far more interesting, more powerful question than, what do you want out of life?
It asks, what pain do you want in your life? What are you willing to struggle for?
That flips everything on its head. Why is that question more important?
Because, as he argues, it's a far greater predictor of how your life will actually turn out. Everyone wants the desirable outcomes, the success, the wealth, the loving relationships, the great physique.
For
But very, very few people are genuinely willing to endure the necessary pain and struggle that acquiring those things requires.
Like the years of grinding work, the difficult emotional conversations, the physical pain of training, the repeated rejections and failures.
Exactly. And because most people aren't willing to suffer for the outcomes they say they want, they settle for something less. They choose the path of least resistance, the path with less pain, and then maybe spend years regretting not pursuing what they truly desire.
So happiness isn't the direct target. It's more like a byproduct that emerges from engaging with chosen struggles.
Yes, real, deep, lifelong fulfillment and meaning aren't found by avoiding problems or waiting for some kind of magical salvation from pain. They are earned through consciously choosing which struggles are worth taking on and then learning how to effectively manage them.
This reminds me of the story he tells about the young prince, Siddhartha Gautama, who becomes the Buddha.
Oh, right. He was born into royalty, lived this life of sheltered ease and comfort, but he became obsessed with overcoming suffering, so he went to the complete opposite extreme. Yeah. He gave up his wealth, became an ascetic, starved himself, tortured himself physically and mentally for years, believing that total extreme suffering was the path to enlightenment.
But what did he learn from all that? Was it worth it?
Well, after years on the verge of death, he had a simple realization that frankly most people already understand. Inflicting suffering on yourself totally sucks.
Yeah.
And it doesn't inherently lead to meaning or enlightenment. His grand idea of finding truth through extreme pain was, as Manson quotes him, a fucking terrible idea.
So he decided to just sit under a tree for 49 days and found his path not in avoiding or seeking suffering, but in understanding its nature and embracing a middle way.
Exactly. Life itself is a form of suffering. The meaning isn't found by eliminating it, but by how you choose to engage with the struggles and pains that are inherent to existence. It's like the story of Yuichiro Miura climbing Everest in his 70s and 80s. Manson suggests the deep joy and meaning for him weren't just in standing on the summit, but were found in the grueling process, the struggle of the climb itself.
Shifting gears slightly, the book also tackles another pervasive cultural issue: the intense pressure to be extraordinary.
Oh man, it feels inescapable, doesn't it? Every celebrity interview, every motivational speaker, every online guru tells you you are special, you are unique, you are destined for greatness. Oprah even said everyone should be famous for 15 minutes.
And if everyone is destined for something extraordinary, what's the mathematical problem with that?
If everyone is extraordinary, then by definition, no one is. Yet, as Manson observes, we absolutely devour this message. We internalize it.
And the damaging consequence is that being average becomes the new standard of failure. Being just okay, being in the middle of the bell curve, living a normal, decent life that feels like the worst possible outcome.
And this pressure can lead to perverse outcomes. If being average is the worst thing, some people seek attention by being extraordinary at the bottom, by being spectacularly messed up or terrible or controversial, because at least that's special.
He tells the story of Jimmy to illustrate this.
Jimmy, the guy who was always talking about his grand business ideas, always rolling, always on the verge of something huge, but in reality, total deadbeat.
Okay.
Stoned, living off friends and family, zero actual productivity. Yet he had this absolutely delusional self-confidence.
And when anyone questioned him, what happened then?
They were ignorant. Anyone who laughed was missing the opportunity. Anyone who pointed out his lifestyle was a jealous hater. He genuinely felt good about himself, like he was special, despite being, as Manson bluntly puts it, a professional leech. His belief in his own specialness was totally untethered from reality or any actual accomplishment.
And Manson even shares his own period of entitlement stemming from adolescence trauma.
Yes, that difficult time being expelled from school, being homeschooled, his parents divorcing, led him to internalize this feeling of being either uniquely special or uniquely defective.
Right.
Both paths led to entitlement. He describes it manifesting particularly in relationships, constantly chasing women for validation, feeling like a cocaine addict takes to a snowman made out of cocaine, just looking for that external hit to feel okay about himself.
Wow, that's a vivid image. And this entitlement justified a lot of bad behavior, followed by shitty, half-assed apologies.
Exactly. He was living a life that, despite moments of fun and adventure, was fundamentally difficult and unstable, often unemployed, sleeping on couches, drinking too much. His feeling of being uniquely entitled prevented him from confronting his real problems and taking responsibility.
He also connects this pressure to be extraordinary to the rise of technology and mass marketing.
Yeah, we are constantly bombarded with images of perfected, curated lives online and in media, the flawless bodies, the luxury vacations, the overnight successes, the constant excitement. This overexposure to the exceptional makes everyone else feel profoundly inadequate by comparison.
And it pushes people to feel like they need to be more extreme just to register on anyone's radar.
Yes, and the narrative's often pushed party like a rock star, sex is everything, prey on existing insecurities, creating problems that feel unsolvable. We see these highlight reels online where people don't seem to have the mundane, messy problems we have, and it makes us feel like failures. The internet, he argues, basically open-sourced insecurity, self-doubt, and shame on a global scale.
But the book offers a powerful reframe. Accepting that you are not special can be incredibly liberating.
Absolutely. Letting go of that pressure to be extraordinary, to constantly be achieving something remarkable, frees you up to pursue what you genuinely wish for without judgment or lofty expectations. You're not doing it to prove something, you're doing it because it matters to you.
And ironically, this often leads to a deeper, growing appreciation for life's most basic, mundane experiences.
Simple friendship. The quiet satisfaction of creating something, the simple act of helping someone, losing yourself in a book, sharing genuine laughter with people you care about. These things, when not overshadowed by the desperate need for external validation, are often far more fulfilling than chasing the feeling of being special.
This leads to another fundamental idea that's crucial for any personal growth: taking responsibility.
This is maybe the single most important realization the book puts forward. It argues that you are fundamentally individually responsible for everything that happens in your life.
Even if it's not your fault.
Exactly. This is a key distinction Manson makes. Responsibility and fault often show up together, but they are different. Fault is past tense. It's the result of choices already made.
Okay.
Responsibility is present tense. It's the result of choices you are making right now, every single day, every moment.
So if you hit someone with your car, you are both at fault and responsible.
Yes. But if you woke up this morning and a baby was left on your doorstep, it is absolutely not your fault that the baby is there. But it is now, unequivocally, your responsibility. Or a judge presiding over a case isn't at fault for the crime committed, but is responsible for handling the case fairly.
The core point being, while others may be to blame for causing you pain or creating a difficult situation, nobody else is ever truly responsible for your situation in the present moment. Only you are responsible for how you choose to see it, how you react to it, and what values you apply to it.
He uses his own story of his first girlfriend cheating on him to illustrate this perfectly.
She was definitely to blame for the act of cheating itself.
Absolutely. She made the choice. But Manson realized he was responsible for his own subsequent misery. He spent weeks, months blaming her, expecting her to fix the emotional wreckage she had caused.
Right.
Holding her responsible for his feelings didn't improve anything. It just kept him stuck and miserable.
But when he finally shifted, when he took responsibility for his own emotional state,
That's when everything changed. He stopped waiting for her to fix him and started fixing himself. He started exercising, rebuilding friendships, meeting new people, focusing on his studies, volunteering. He consciously chose better values for himself, values based on self-respect and growth rather than the value of trying to get her validation. He even speculates that his own prior inability to take responsibility for his emotional needs might have contributed to the relationship's failure in the first place.
that's a painful but powerful insight. There's also the story of William James, the father of American psychology.
James was born with advantages, but he suffered terribly from chronic health problems and repeated professional failures. He fell into a profound, debilitating depression and planned his suicide.
But he decided to conduct one final experiment first.
Yes, he decided he would spend 1 year living as if he were 100% responsible for everything that happened in his life, no matter how unfair it seemed or whose fault it might have been. And during that year, he committed to doing absolutely everything in his power to change his circumstances and his internal state. If nothing improved after that year, he would go through with his plan.
And of course, that year became his turning point.
He credited that radical act of taking total responsibility as his rebirth. It highlights that when we feel like we are choosing our problems, even if the circumstances weren't our fault, we feel empowered. When we feel like problems are just happening to us, forced upon us without our consent, that's when we feel like victims and become miserable. Responsibility is the key to feeling agency.
This conversation about how we see things, how we interpret our problems, leads directly into the next idea, challenging our own beliefs and the danger of certainty.
Yeah, we're constantly told things like trust your gut, follow your heart, believe in yourself. But Manson points out that our brains, while amazing, are also deeply flawed and unreliable.
He uses the button experiment to show this.
Right. Participants were put in front of buttons and a light. They were told to press buttons and try to figure out the pattern to make the light flash and get points. Crucially, the points were awarded randomly. There was no pattern.
None at all.
None. But within minutes, people started creating elaborate, complex theories about which buttons to press, in what sequence, and why.
And they became absolutely convinced they were right, despite the randomness.
Exactly. It shows that the human brain is a meaning machine. It's constantly trying to find patterns and create narratives to understand the world. But it's terrible at it sometimes. It makes mistakes, forgets things, misinterprets. And once it creates a meaning or a belief, it becomes incredibly biased towards holding on to it, often ignoring or twisting contradictory evidence.
Like the comedian Emo Phillips said, "I used to think the human brain was the most wonderful organ, then I realized who was telling me this."
It's funny because it's true. Most of our beliefs, then, aren't right. They're just less wrong than other potential beliefs. Given this fundamental unreliability, the only logical path to real growth and progress is through constant self-skepticism. Rigorously challenging our own beliefs and assumptions is the most rational thing we can do.
He tells the chilling story of Meredith Marin and false memory syndrome to show how unreliable memory and the brain's need for narrative can be.
Yeah, Meredith was in therapy, and her therapist, using a popular but now largely discredited method, led her to believe she had repressed memories of childhood sexual abuse. This belief, rooted in something that never actually happened, completely tore her family apart for years.
And later, she realized the memories were invented.
Yes, her mind, trying to make sense of her current unhappiness and past experiences, constructed this elaborate false memory. It allowed her to see herself as a victim, giving her a narrative that explained her pain and allowed her to avoid taking responsibility for her current problems. This painful case contributed to the formal identification of false memory syndrome and led to significant changes in therapeutic practices and legal challenges. It's a stark reminder that our memories are horribly unreliable.
There's also the story of Erin, the woman who was convinced she could cure death.
Erin is a perfect example of the danger of absolute certainty divorced from reality. She pursued Manson for years, relentlessly positive, absolutely certain she had discovered a way to cure death, and was divinely destined to do so. Despite being shown the irrationality of her claims and the harm her beliefs were causing, her certainty would not budge.
Even though she was taking action, her underlying values seemed flacked, as he'd say, driven by this fixed, unchallengeable belief.
Exactly. Her certainty was the problem. It shielded her from reality and prevented any form of productive growth or self-correction. This ties into research by people like Roy Baumeister, who found that high self-esteem, particularly the kind built on shaky foundations, can actually correlate with doing bad things. Evil often stems from a fragile entitlement that requires absolute certainty, which can become incredibly rigid and even violent when challenged.
It sounds like another example of the backwards law from earlier, doesn't it? The more you desperately try to be certain about something, the more uncertain and anxious you feel underneath.
And conversely, the more you become comfortable with uncertainty, with the idea that you don't know everything, that you might be wrong, the more comfortable and confident you actually become.
How so?
Well, uncertainty removes judgment of others because you don't know their story or motivations, reducing stereotyping and bias. It relieves self-judgment because you don't know if you're truly lovable or successful yet.
And it's presented as the absolute root of progress and growth.
Because the person who thinks he knows everything learns nothing. You must admit what you don't know, or admit the possibility that your existing knowledge is wrong, to be able to learn anything new or grow in any meaningful way.
This brings us neatly to the concept of values and metrics presented as the compass we use to navigate our problems.
That's right. What we choose to value, consciously or unconsciously, determines the metrics by which we measure ourselves and our lives. It defines what success and failure look like to us.
Okay.
And if you want to change how you see your problems, how you feel about your life, the most powerful way is to change your underlying values or the metrics you use to measure them.
He contrasts the stories of two musicians who were famously kicked out of hugely successful bands, Dave Mustaine of Megadeth and Pete Best, the original drummer for the Beatles.
Dave Mustaine was fired from Metallica, but went on to form Megadeth, achieving massive fame, selling millions of albums, playing to huge crowds. By almost any external metric, he was incredibly successful. Yet Manson points out, Mustaine still often seemed incredibly bitter and felt like a failure, constantly comparing himself to Metallica's even greater, almost unprecedented global success.
So his values seemed to be external validation and being the biggest, and his metric was direct comparison to Metallica's record sales or fame level.
Exactly. And because that metric was based on a crappy value, an arbitrary external comparison he couldn't control, despite all his success, he was miserable. He was constantly being tortured by a metric he couldn't win.
Contrast that with Pete Best. He was kicked out of the Beatles just before they exploded onto the world stage. He certainly had reason to feel bitter and resentful.
And he was, initially. It was devastating. But as he got older, he fundamentally reprioritized what he valued. He stopped measuring his life by fame or musical success and began measuring it by his family, by having genuine relationships, and by living a simple, stable, easy life.
And by those metrics, he achieved remarkable contentment.
Precisely. Yeah. He became a happy, healthy old man, finding fulfillment in things that were largely within his control and based on intrinsic values, unlike the fleeting, uncontrollable metric of global superstardom. Their stories powerfully illustrate how much our subjective experience of success or failure is determined by our chosen or unchosen values and metrics.
So it's not enough to just have values, you need to have good values.
And Manson defines good values quite specifically. They should be reality-based, meaning they align with how the world actually works. They should be socially constructive, benefiting others as well as yourself. And they should be immediate and controllable, meaning you have direct agency over upholding them right now, today.
Like honesty. You have complete control over whether you are honest or not in any given moment. It reflects reality, and generally it's socially constructive, even when it's difficult.
Right. Bad values, on the other hand, are often superstitious or detached from reality, socially destructive, and crucially, not immediate or controllable.
Like popularity or being liked.
Exactly. Your popularity is entirely dependent on other people's opinions, which you cannot control. Often not based on reality. People might like you for the wrong reasons, and it can be socially destructive if you compromise your integrity just to be liked.
The book proposes 5 specific good values. Honesty, innovation, seen as creativity and a commitment to learning. Self-respect, setting boundaries and having standards for how you treat yourself and allow others to treat you. Rejection, the ability to comfortably say and hear no. And contemplation, mortality, keeping the inevitability of death in perspective, which we'll circle back to.
And again, he connects this back to suffering. The story of Hiro Onoda, the Japanese soldier who held out for 30 years in the jungle after World War II because his value was absolute loyalty to the emperor and his mission.
Incredible story.
Shows how a powerful value can sustain you through unimaginable suffering. But that same value, applied rigidly without adaptation, can lead to misery when reality changes, as it did when he returned to a completely different Japan. Values and pain are complexly interwoven.
Which brings us to another counterintuitive idea, the failure-success paradox.
The book argues that improvement, true mastery at anything, isn't built on moments of sudden success. It's built on accumulating thousands, even millions, of tiny failures. The magnitude of your eventual success in any endeavor is directly proportional to how many times you've been willing to fail at it along the way.
So if someone is significantly better than you at something, it's highly likely they've simply failed at it more times than you have.
Exactly. They've put in the painful reps, the messy experiments that didn't work, the wrong turns. The story of Picasso drawing on a napkin illustrates this perfectly.
Oh yeah, I love that one.
When someone balked at him, charging $20,000 for a drawing that took 2 minutes, he replied that it didn't take him 2 minutes. It took him 60 years. 60 years of practice, experimentation, and countless failures that built the skill to draw that line in 2 minutes.
It's like a child learning to walk. They fall down hundreds of times, they bump their head, they scrape their knees, they cry.
But they don't ever think, well, this isn't for me. I guess I'm just not cut out for walking. They just get back up and try again. Avoiding failure is a learned behavior.
And where do we learn it from?
Well, he points to various sources. Education systems that punish poor performance rather than seeing it as part of the learning process. Overbearing parents who try to shield their kids from every mistake or discomfort, preventing them from developing resilience.
Right.
Mass media that only shows the final product, the polished success, without showing the years of tedious practice, painful setbacks, and repeated failures that went into it.
And the consequence of learning to avoid failure is that we reach a point where we're terrified to try anything where we might not immediately be good. We stick to what's easy or what we already know we're good at.
And that confines us. It stifles growth, creativity, and the possibility of achieving anything truly meaningful. The paradox is this. You can only be truly successful at something if you are willing to fail at it. If you are unwilling to fail, you are ultimately unwilling to succeed.
So, people hear all this. They understand their values might be off. They see how they avoid responsibility. They recognize entitlement. They fear failure. And then they ask the seemingly impossible question. Okay, I get it, but how do I change?
And Manson's answer is blunt, but in character.
Yeah.
Do or do not. There is no how.
Do it, like Nike.
In principle, yes.
Yeah.
Changing your values, taking responsibility, choosing new struggles. It is, at its core, a decision, a choice to start giving a fuck about something different, something better.
But it's obviously not easy. It feels incredibly difficult sometimes.
And that's because there are inevitable side effects. You will feel uncertain. You will feel like a failure according to your old metrics. You will feel like an imposter or a fraud as you try on new ways of being. You will have to weather rejections and discomfort. Giving up old, comfortable values is disorienting. And relationships that were built on those old values or dynamics may very well shift or end. These uncomfortable feelings and outcomes aren't signs you're doing it wrong. They are just the cost of change.
He calls the how do I change type of questions VCR questions.
Yeah. Questions that seem impossibly complex, opaque, and overwhelming from the perspective of the person asking them. But from the outside, the answer appears totally obvious, like, how do I drop out of med school? Or how do I ask that person out? Or how do I ask my adult kids to move out?
And the difficulty isn't the logistics, the paperwork, saying the words, finding a box for the kids' stuff.
No. The difficulty is the pain avoidance. It's risking the associated pain. The pain of disappointing your parents, the pain of embarrassment or rejection, the pain of potentially hurting your children's feelings or making them angry. The action itself isn't hard. Facing the emotional consequences.
And this insight leads him to flip the traditional understanding of motivation. We usually think of it as a chain. Emotional inspiration leads to motivation, which then leads to desirable action. So if you're not feeling inspired, you're stuck.
But he argues the chain actually runs the other way, or maybe it's a loop. Action leads to inspiration, which leads to motivation. Action isn't just the result of motivation, it is often its cause.
The do something principle.
Exactly. If you're feeling stuck, unmotivated, unsure of what to do, just do something, anything. Take one tiny, simple action, and then harness the reaction, the consequence, the feeling from that small action to inspire and motivate the next small action. It's how people make huge changes. Redesigning a website, one small element at a time, a novelist writing just one page a day. Momentum comes from starting, not from waiting for inspiration.
Next, a concept that feels particularly relevant in our modern world of infinite options, finding freedom through commitment.
Yeah, this directly challenges the consumer culture message that more is always better, or that having endless choices and keeping all your options open is the key to happiness. Manson argues that often we are happier with less.
He references the paradox of choice.
Right. When we have too many options, it actually decreases our satisfaction with the choice we ultimately make. Why? Because we're constantly aware of all the potential benefits and experiences we didn't choose, all the roads not taken.
Right, the FOMO.
Exactly. This creates anxiety and regret, preventing us from fully appreciating the choice we did make.
And avoiding commitment seems like a way to keep all those options open.
It does. But in doing so, you deny yourself the profound rewards that only come from the depth of experience. Some of the richest, most meaningful experiences in life are simply not possible without long-term commitment.
Like living in a place for years and truly becoming part of a community, or being with a single person for a decade and building deep trust and shared history, or dedicating a lifetime to mastering a difficult skill.
These require sticking with something through the hard parts, past the initial excitement, through the inevitable problems. Manson shares his own journey with this.
His life as a digital nomad, 5 years, 55 countries, chasing adventure and novelty.
And on the surface, it sounds incredible, right? All these amazing experiences.
Yeah.
But he realized that while it was fueled by curiosity, it was also driven by deeper underlying shame and commitment issues from his adolescence trauma. It was a game of global hopscotch, where the constant superficial highs were, consciously or unconsciously, used to numb pain and avoid putting down roots or committing to difficult emotional work. He felt both profound, seeing the world, and meaningless, lacking deep connection at the same time.
But in his 30s, he made a conscious shift.
He recognized the opportunities that commitment offered. He made a deliberate choice to say no to almost everything and commit to all but the very best people and experiences and values for him. He committed to writing, committed to one woman, committed to one location, committed to nurturing a few genuine, deep friendships.
And his discovery was counterintuitive.
Absolutely. He found a profound freedom in that commitment. Freedom from the anxiety of constant options, freedom to delve deep into the richness of a few chosen things rather than skimming the surface of many. He realized there are diminishing returns on seeking breadth as you get older and more experienced.
Right.
The first new country is transformative, but the 51st adds very little new insight by comparison. The first deeply vulnerable conversation is terrifying and freeing. The 1000th is the foundation of intimacy.
This idea of commitment and choosing what to value spills directly into relationships, boundaries, and trust.
Yeah, one of those 5 good values he proposed is rejection, the ability to say and hear no comfortably. Honesty, a core good value, requires this.
Right.
Being able to set boundaries, to say no to things that violate your values or capacity, and to accept when others say no to you is an absolutely crucial life skill.
And it actually makes relationships better and emotional lives healthier.
Because nobody wants to be stuck in unwanted situations or relationships simply because they lack the skill to say no or are afraid of hearing it. He even uses Romeo and Juliet as a potential example, suggesting Shakespeare might have intended it partially as a satire of romantic ideals.
Arguing they were just kids, absolutely out of their fucking minds.
Pretty much. Killing themselves to prove their love in a story full of dramatic gestures and a complete lack of honest, boundary-setting communication.
Manson also shares his experience traveling in Russia and encountering a very different communication style.
Right. He found people incredibly blunt and frank. They would state their opinions directly, even critically. He recounts someone telling him something he just said was stupid within minutes of meeting them.
Oh, okay.
At first, coming from a culture where people prioritize being nice and avoiding direct confrontation, it felt incredibly rude and jarring.
But he came to see it differently.
Yes, he began to appreciate it as unadulterated expression, a form of honesty in the truest sense. He found it was a strange form of liberation through accepting rejection. People weren't afraid to speak their minds because they weren't deathly afraid of hearing no or being disagreed with. It was a freedom from the constant anxiety of offending or being offended that he'd experienced in more bullshitty, fake, nice cultures. Travel, he argues, forces you to confront different values and re-examine your own cultural assumptions about what's normal or good.
This leads into the crucial discussion of boundaries in relationships.
Boundaries, in Manson's view, are fundamentally about defining responsibility for your own emotions and problems. In unhealthy relationships, people constantly try to solve each other's problems, not necessarily out of genuine love, but often out of a selfish desire to feel good about themselves by being needed or by being the hero.
He calls these victim-saver dynamics and says they're often patterned after the relationships we saw our parents have.
Exactly. With blurry boundaries, you never develop strong, independent personal values. Your only value becomes making your partner happy or constantly trying to get them to make you happy, which is it's a recipe for disaster. Relationships built on that kind of transactional, conditional foundation lack depth and inevitably crumble.
Healthy relationships, he argues, are built differently.
Yes, they're between two people who take responsibility for solving their own problems, not in order to be validated by their partner, but in order to feel good about each other. Support is given and received as a conscious choice, not as an obligation stemming from neediness or entitlement.
He dissects the victim-saver dynamic further.
The victim seeks attention and affection by creating or exaggerating problems. The saver seeks attention and affection by fixing problems. Both roles are fundamentally selfish and conditional.
Right.
True, unconditional love or acceptance is rarely experienced within these dynamics. A truly loving victim would take responsibility for their issues. A loving saver would encourage the victim to solve their own problems rather than enabling them.
He also stresses the necessity of conflict in relationships.
Without conflict, without hashing out differences openly and vocally, relationships are often based on manipulation, avoidance, or passive aggression. Conflict, when handled respectfully, reveals who is truly there for you, who can engage with you authentically even when it's uncomfortable. Nobody truly trusts a yes man or someone who never disagrees.
And underlying all of this is trust.
Trust is presented as the single most important ingredient in any relationship. Without it, the relationship, no matter how much love or affection is expressed, is meaningless. Love given must be trusted to be unconditional. Cheating, he argues, isn't just about the sexual act. It's the fundamental destruction of trust that is the core damage.
And rebuilding trust after it's broken is incredibly difficult.
It's only possible if the person who broke the trust is willing to admit the true underlying values that led to the breach, not just make excuses, and fully owns those values and their consequences. And crucially, they must build a solid, consistent track record of improved behavior over time. Without admitting the root cause, the values, and demonstrating consistent change, there's no basis for trust to reform.
He uses the china plate analogy for this.
Break it once, and with immense care and effort, you might be able to piece it back together. But break it repeatedly, and eventually it shatters into so many pieces that it's simply beyond repair.
Powerful analogy. Finally, the book circles back to one of the 5 good values he proposed: the contemplation of one's own mortality.
Yeah, this value is presented as the ultimate compass, the crucial perspective necessary to keep all other values in check.
Okay.
He introduces the work of Ernest Becker and his Pulitzer Prize-winning book, The Denial of Death. Becker's core idea is that humans are unique in the animal kingdom because we can conceptualize our own death. This knowledge is terrifying, creating what he termed death terror.
And to cope with this terror, we create immortality projects.
These are attempts to create a symbolic self that we believe will outlast our physical bodies. This can be through seeking fame, accumulating vast wealth, building empires, creating art, leaving behind family legacies, or identifying strongly with religious or political ideologies that promise some form of eternal significance.
And Becker argued that these immortality projects, while a source of much meaning and purpose, are also the root cause of much human conflict.
Yes, wars, oppression, discrimination. These often stem from defending one group's chosen immortality project, their religion, their nation, their ideology, against the perceived threat of another group's project.
Manson connects this back to the book's theme. We are driven by our fear of death to give way too many chucks about these distracting immortality projects. They give us a sense of significance and permanence that helps us avoid the terrifying reality of impermanence.
And true, not giving a single fleck, in the most profound sense, involves embracing that impermanence, becoming comfortable with the fact that you and everything you build will eventually cease to exist. This acceptance reduces entitlement because it shows you're not the center of the universe, destined for eternal significance just by showing up.
Becker, late in his life and on his deathbed, came to believe that immortality projects weren't the solution to death terror, but actually the problem.
Yes, he realized the true path was to question our conceptual selves, to become comfortable with death itself.
Because confronting death has a profound effect on your values.
It obliterates all the crappy, fragile, superficial values. While people are busy chasing money, validation, or certainty to feel important or permanent, the inevitability of death poses a painful but essential question. What is your legacy? What mark will you make with the short time you have? Not a mark in terms of fame, but in terms of the impact you have, the values you live by.
He describes the visceral experience of standing on a cliff edge, like at the Cape of Good Hope, as a way to connect with this.
Yeah, your body goes into fight or flight near such a drop. Your senses sharpen, you feel tension, maybe trembling, even the urge to cry as your body screams at you to back away from potential doom. It forces an acute acknowledgement of mortality right there at the physical edge of the world.
But in that confrontation, there's also a strange exhilaration.
Yes, a feeling of being intensely, acutely conscious and alive at the precipice, laughing in the face of it almost.
Death is the ultimate compass.
It is. It's the only certainty, and it must be the ultimate orienting principle for our values and decisions.
So how do you become comfortable with death, according to this?
By understanding yourself as something bigger than just your individual, separate self.
Yeah.
By choosing values that stretch beyond serving only yourself. Values that are simple, immediate, controllable, and importantly, tolerant of chaos and uncertainty. That feeling of caring about something greater than yourself, whether it's community, justice, love, creativity, or simply alleviating suffering is, he argues, the basic root of happiness. It's echoed in the wisdom of thinkers and figures, from Aristotle to Jesus to, yes, even the Beatles singing "All You Need Is Love."
And this stands in direct contrast to entitlement.
Entitlement isolates you. It shrinks your world, sucks all your attention inward onto your own perceived needs and slights, projects your biases onto everyone else. It feels tempting and empowering in the moment, but it's ultimately spiritual poison.
Reflecting on modern society, he observes that we are more materially comfortable than almost any generation before us, yet we seem psychologically tormented by shallow things.
Yeah, people feel they deserve things they haven't earned, believe they have rights without having to make sacrifices. They claim expertise or greatness without having put in the experience or struggle, mistaking temporary attention for genuine significance, fueled by a culture that constantly broadcasts the extraordinary while shaming the average.
But the book offers a final, powerful affirmation that cuts through this.
You are already great, not because of some external achievement or because you're destined for fame or because everyone says you're special. You are great, he argues, because in the face of endless confusion and certain death, you continue to choose what to give a chuck about and what not to.
That simple, fundamental choice to care about something in the midst of the chaos and the certainty of death, that choice itself is what makes you beautiful, successful, and loved, even if you don't feel it. Standing on a cliff, he suggests, might help you feel it.
He shares the quote from Charles Bukowski. We all gonna die, all of us. What a circus. That alone should make us love each other, but it doesn't. We are terrorized and flattened by life's trivialities. We are eaten up by nothing.
Wow. And he ends the book reflecting on the ultimate lesson from his friend Josh's death by drowning, which drove home the realization that there is nothing to be afraid of, ever. Reminding himself of death helps him hold on to that perspective.
It's a confronting but ultimately kind of liberating message, isn't it?
It really is. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into Mark Manson's The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, we've traveled from understanding that not giving a fuck is an active choice of what to care about, not indifference.
Through embracing the necessity of suffering, questioning the pursuit of happiness, learning to choose our struggles, accepting we're not special, taking absolute responsibility for our lives, challenging our deepest held beliefs, and the danger of certainty.
To seeing how our values and metrics shape our experience, understanding that failure is necessary for success, how action creates motivation, the surprising freedom found in commitment, building relationships on honesty and trust, and finally, confronting our own mortality as the ultimate compass for a meaningful life.
It's a powerful, often uncomfortable, but potentially transformative argument. That true fulfillment doesn't come from avoiding problems or trying to feel good all the time, but from facing the inevitable difficulties of life head-on and consciously choosing what is genuinely important enough to struggle for.
Which leaves us with this to ponder. If life is a messy, uncertain process of constantly being less wrong over time, and true growth comes from bravely challenging our own potentially flawed certainties and values, what deeply held belief or value might you be wrong about right now? And what would happen if you found the courage to genuinely question it?
Something to sit with.
Indeed. That's all for this deep dive.